Imagine you're a simple medieval peasant. Your daily life revolves around mud, stale bread, and avoiding the wrath of your feudal lord. Then one day, a preacher appears in town, claiming you can achieve glory and eternal salvation by marching to Jerusalem. Sounds promising, right? But what they don't tell you is the journey involves weeks of hunger, disease, and trying to survive in armor that doesn't even fit. Would you survive a single day in the chaos of the Crusades? Stick around to find out. Imagine it's dawn, and you're already awake, trudging barefoot through the cold mud outside your little wooden hut. There's no fiery morning sky or soothing birdsong, just the muffled clatter of tools and the grumbling of other peasants, heads low and backs bent like yours. You've spent the last decade, maybe your whole life, eking out the same monotonous cycle. Sow, reap, repeat. Your day starts with a hunk of bread so hard it doubles as a tooth test, paired with a thin ale that's somehow both sour and your best option for clean drinking water. Meat. That's for the Lord's table, not yours. The closest you get to a feast is during festivals, when they occasionally toss the scraps your way like you're one of their hounds. Most days, it's gruel, a sad mix of slightly less stale bread and boiled weeds you're forced to call soup. The fields you work aren't even yours, not really. They belong to the Lord, whose fortress looms on the hill, casting shadows over your shoddy collection of thatched roofs. For every morsel you grow, you owe him a chunk of it, and you better hope you have enough left over after taxes and tithes to feed your family, or it's another long winter scraping by. Forget comfort. Comfort is sleeping on a pile of straw that doesn't smell too bad, and maybe, just maybe, not worrying that sickness will sweep through your village again, claiming your neighbors, your friends, and possibly you. Life is cold, muddy, brittle, and unfair. But it's also what you were born into, the hand you were dealt. You don't imagine anything better because, well, you don't know anything better. Until now. It happens on an otherwise unremarkable afternoon. You're working like usual, dirt caked under your nails, when you hear a commotion in the village square. Dropping your hoe, you shuffle over with the rest of the crowd gathering near the well. Standing on an old wooden crate, there he is, the preacher. He's short, but has a presence like nothing you've ever seen. His bare feet are filthy, and his robes are worn almost to threads, but the way he speaks makes him seem larger than life. His voice booms with authority, a mix of fire and promise that sends shivers down your dirty spine. The preacher doesn't waste time with pleasantries. He describes a glorious mission ordained by heaven itself, a crusade to retake Jerusalem. Or did he say Jerusalem? The place doesn't matter because it's what's at stake that grabs your attention, eternal salvation. He paints vivid images of shimmering angels tallying names in a heavenly book, his voice rising as he describes the paradise awaiting those who join. Then comes the second part. Gold, land, riches beyond imagining, just waiting to be reclaimed from infidels who have defiled holy lands and, according to him, deserve righteous correction. You've barely left your village in your entire life, maybe gone as far as the nearest town on market day. The idea of tangible wealth and travel, leaving this rut, is almost intoxicating. Perhaps heaven's glory alone might not have been enough, but pleasure paired with paradise. Suddenly, your muddy little life feels too small, too cramped to bear. That's not all. The preacher speaks with urgency, warning that time is short. By now, he's pacing, his hands high in the air, his tone fluctuating between scolding and encouraging. The call comes from God, he thunders. And what higher purpose could you serve? The crowd murmurs, heads nodding, some crossing themselves. You don't understand all the intricacies of his words. You've lived your life illiterate, and Latin isn't exactly your second language. But that's beside the point. Peasants like you don't question. God's will is as obvious and as inevitable as taxes. If a holy man says, "This is what you're meant to do," who are you to argue? A hand on your shoulder interrupts your thoughts. It's one of the older villagers, a wiry man who remembers the last preacher passing through. "Dangerous promises," he mutters, shaking his head, but his words don't sink in. It's not that you're gullible exactly. It's just that something in the preacher's raw conviction fills a void you didn't know existed. This journey, he insists, isn't just a calling. It's an escape. A way to rise above a life of endless toil, to trade mud-streaked anonymity for divine purpose and personal glory. For the first time, the treasure feels almost within reach, even if the exact path there is hazy. That's the thing about preachers. They have a knack for making vagueness sound like clarity. The murmurs in the crowd grow louder. Some people drop to their knees, weeping openly, while others clutch their neighbor's arms. There's excitement in the air, a collective buzz of urgency and possibility. The preacher's eyes scan the gathering, pausing now and then to single someone out, pointing dramatically and hollering, You've been chosen." Why wouldn't you believe him? Everyone here knows hardship. Hope is the rarest thing in this damp corner of the world. And now here it is, lit like a torch in front of you. Hope, and the promise of something bigger, something better. That night at home, thoughts gnaw at you. Your hoe leans against the wall, like it always does, the dull reflection on the blade somehow mocking your indecision. You stare at it, thinking about tomorrow, how nothing will change unless you make it change. The preacher is leaving at dawn, his small group of followers already waiting by the mill. He said he'd be heading to the rallying point where others like you will gather before setting off. Jerusalem is thousands of miles away, though honestly, you don't even know how far that is. In your mind, it might as well be on the edge of the earth. But does it matter? What matters is leaving. What matters is the idea of not spending the rest of your days muddy and invisible. You sigh, shifting on your straw bed. The weight of the decision presses down harder than any bundle of wheat you've carried, and yet it feels less like a choice and more like destiny. In the eerie silence of the night, you promise yourself you'll be ready when the rooster crows. Tomorrow, you'll trade your hoe for a sword, your rags for a tunic, and this mud-streaked routine for a pilgrimage to who knows where. Jerusalem is just a word right now, but one full of possibilities. You shake off the nerves. It's time to start a new chapter of your life, guided by faith, fate, and honestly, just a pinch of desperation. What you don't know, can't know, is just how much chaos you've signed up for. The preacher never mentioned the logistical mess that is assembling thousands of untrained peasants into something vaguely resembling an army. But that's tomorrow's problem. And spoiler alert, it's a big one. The morning of your first day as a crusader should feel triumphant, shouldn't it? You've left behind a life of mud and monotony, replacing your hoe with a weapon you barely know how to hold, and setting off toward adventure. Or so you thought. But standing there at the rally point, staring at the scene before you, that triumphant feeling evaporates in an instant. This is not an army. It is chaos. It's a disordered mob, noisy and unpredictable. A swirling mix of peasants like yourself, grizzled merchants looking for opportunities, and the occasional noble dressed in armor so ornate, it's clear they've never actually seen a battlefield. Around you, people are yelling, not stern orders or inspiring battle cries, but accusations. "Who stole my sack of bread?" shouts one man, his red face scrunched in anger. Another is tugging at what appears to be a goat on a leash. "Does anyone have a spare wheel for my cart?" asks someone else, gesturing toward a pile of broken wood that used to be a wagon. There are children running barefoot through the crowd, dodging half-hearted swats from their parents. And at least one person seems to have brought a musical instrument. At least one man insists on bringing a piano, you think. And there's no one around to stop him, because, well, there's no one in charge. The preacher, your preacher, comes into view, but he's no longer the towering figure of confidence you heard speaking at the village. Here, among the chaos, he's harder to pick out, his voice barely audible over the din. He clutches a staff, pointing towards some distant hill, saying something about glory and salvation. No one listens. It's becoming clear that no one really knows what they're doing. There's no training session, no inspirational speech. You're just here, surrounded by strangers, looking as clueless as you feel. Then there's the armor, or the lack of it. To your left, a farmer-turned-crusader is strapping together what looks like kitchen scraps and pretending it's a chest plate. Hand-me-down iron sweater is about the most generous description for the actual armor you spot on a few others. It's rusty, unwieldy, and carries an unmistakable smell of old sweat and despair. And those are the lucky ones. Most people here, yourself included, have no armor at all. You're dressed in the same fabric tunic that barely protected you from the rain back home. Your weapon, an old farming tool repurposed into a club, feels more like a suggestion than a deterrent. Somewhere nearby, there's a man carrying a pitchfork. Beside him, another has lashed a hammer to a broomstick and proudly named it God's toothpick. Confidence is high. Capability is non-existent. As the hours pass, the cracks become harder to ignore. Fights are breaking out in the crowd, not just over stolen supplies, but over nothing at all. A noble shouts at a peasant for bumping into him. Someone accuses someone else of heresy because they didn't cross themselves fast enough. The sun creeps higher in the sky, hotter and less forgiving, and still, no one makes a move. You hadn't thought much about logistics before arriving here, how food and supplies were supposed to get to Jerusalem, or even where Jerusalem was. The Holy Land felt close in the preacher's sermon, like some magnificent city just over the horizon. But now, hearing the whispers of the few who actually have experience traveling, you're starting to realize that it's not close at all. One person insists it's just past Constantinople, though that's meaningless to most of you who have never even seen a map. Another says it will take months of walking south and east, through land none of you have ever set foot on. Here's the catch. Even they seem unsure. You think about leaving. There's a part of you that wants to slip away, shuffle back toward the familiar mud of home, and pretend you never showed up here. But that thought doesn't last long. Walking away now would feel like turning your back on God. And even though you're beginning to suspect this isn't exactly the noble crusade you were promised, the preacher's fiery words and the promise of salvation still cling to you like the sweat-soaked tunic on your back. Besides, you're not alone in this. Everyone here is just as lost, confused, and scared as you. There's some comfort in that. Misery loves company, as they say. Or at least, you think they say. It's hard to be sure since no one around you is exactly eloquent. As the day drags on, things don't improve. Supplies are running low before the march has even begun. Those who brought extra bread are eating it now, despite knowing they'll regret it later. Others are trading what little they have for items even less useful. A rusty knife, a strip of cloth someone else called a bandage. You overhear someone saying his family back home spent 3 days' worth of grain on the sword he's holding, and it's already bent at a strange angle. The longer you stand there watching this spectacle, the more you notice the desperation in people's faces. This isn't a holy army. It's barely an army at all. It's a gathering of people who wanted something better for themselves, who believed in a promise no one really understood. It's a mob, dressed in scraps and clutching weapons that aren't fit for a real fight. By dusk, the chaos has settled slightly, if only because exhaustion has set in. Fires are lit in makeshift camps, and the smell of burnt bread wafts into the air. You sit at the edge of the crowd, staring at the flames and feeling the weight of your choice. Ahead of you are miles and miles of unknown territory, filled with dangers no one can fully comprehend. Behind you is the life you left behind, the mud, the bread, the ceaseless toil. Here, there's something strange and new, an adventure maybe. Or maybe it's just more suffering with a different view. But there's no turning back now. Whatever lies ahead, you've committed to it, even if you have no idea what that even means. You stare ahead into the dark, trying to picture Jerusalem. Instead, you see the faces of the people around you, tired, hungry, confused, just like yours. Tomorrow, the journey begins, trudging into the unknown for the faintest chance of glory or salvation, or, at this point, survival. The march has yet to start, and somehow you're already questioning how much longer you'll last. Your feet ache just from standing. The weapon you've been clutching feels heavier now, though you haven't even swung it yet. As the fires die down and the first stars appear, someone mumbles a prayer. More voices join in. It's quiet, hesitant, like even the prayer itself realizes how unprepared you all are. You close your eyes and tell yourself it will be better tomorrow, though deep down, you know better. This is the beginning of something messy, disorganized, and impossibly difficult. You don't say that out loud, of course. Hope is all anyone has left, and yet, somehow, despite the mess of today, part of you still believes in the preacher's promise. Not the gold or the riches, no, you've pretty much ridden those off. But the other part, the part about salvation, about earning your place in heaven, about being part of something that matters. It's that belief, thin as it is, that keeps you here. That, and the thought that going home at this point would feel worse than facing whatever lies ahead. Tomorrow, the crowd will finally begin its slow march. But tonight, under the stars, there's silence. Almost like the world is holding its breath. You've barely started walking, and already your feet are screaming. The loose-fitting shoes you were so used to back home, nothing more than thin leather stitched together, have betrayed you. These turn shoes were never meant for this kind of abuse. They slide on the muddy roads, doing little to protect against sharp stones or the grit that burrows into every blister forming under your skin. And the blisters, they aren't polite little spots. No, they're raw and painful, swelling angrily every time you shift your weight. You try adjusting them, but it's no use. The further you walk, the worse the burning gets until every step feels like walking on an open wound. Ahead of you, the crowd shuffles forward, passing a trail of discarded shoes and scraps of fabric from those who couldn't take it anymore. You wonder if you'll be next to throw yours aside and walk barefoot, risking cuts and infection before you've even made it out of familiar territory. And the worst part? This is only the first day of miles that stretch ahead, miles you can't even begin to count. You were told, vaguely, that Jerusalem is somewhere in the east, past several foreign lands and big cities whose names you don't recognize. Frankly, you'd assumed it was a straight shot, a few weeks maybe. Now though, with every excruciating step and jerky shuffle, your enthusiasm is wavering. Every mile feels like a punishment, not a mission of glory. The preacher, still near the front of the pack, occasionally shouts encouragement. He's far enough away that you can barely hear him. That's fine with you. His words didn't help your feet or your stomach this morning, and truthfully, your stomach has become a bigger concern. It's not like you were expecting feasts along the way, but the food situation has become a daily frustration, one you didn't entirely foresee. You brought provisions, everyone did, but it quickly becomes obvious that your attempt at planning wasn't exactly sufficient. By midday, the pack strapped on your back feels twice as heavy as it did this morning. Carefully wrapped inside, you have exactly 2 onions, one starting to soften in the sun, a small hunk of black bread, and half of a dried biscuit, hard enough to chip a tooth, or possibly use as a weapon if necessary. None of it is particularly appetizing, and as you force down a bite of bread while walking, chewing, it feels like eating gravel. It sits like a stone in your belly, far too dense to be satisfying, yet nowhere near enough to fill you. Someone nearby is gnawing on what looks like a salted fish tail, but the smell alone turns your stomach. The truth is, the hunger is relentless. By the 4th or 5th day on the road, it's no longer a dull ache. It's loud, roaring inside you. Your stomach groans in protest, a constant reminder that the food you're eating doesn't even come close to replacing the calories burned just by walking, let alone carrying your gear. Hunger is becoming a voice of its own, whispering doubts into your ear with every step. Was this really a good idea? Jerusalem will still be there tomorrow. Couldn't you just head back? The only thing keeping you from turning around is the quiet shame of admitting you didn't even make it past the first week, and the lingering fear of going home empty-handed, a failure in the eyes of God and everyone else. As the days pass, new problems begin to surface. Diseases, silent, unshakable enemies, start creeping through the growing mass of crusaders. You notice the first signs early on. Coughing, groaning, a few pale faces tucked away in the crowd. Someone offers a muttered prayer for the sick, but prayers don't fix the overwhelming stench of unwashed bodies mingling with the sweat and mud of hundreds of people packed together, marching in the same direction. Hygiene wasn't exactly stellar back home, but this is entirely different. You haven't bathed in over a week, but neither has anyone else. The smell clings to you like a second skin, bitter and sour, a heavy reminder that no one here has the time or the supplies to stay clean. The strong collective aroma makes you almost dizzy at times, especially when the weather turns blisteringly hot. And then there's dysentery. That word alone is enough to churn your stomach. The older villagers mentioned it once or twice when you were growing up. A disease whispered about like some far-off fate no one wanted to dwell on. But now you're seeing it firsthand. The unsanitary conditions are catching up with the group. Makeshift latrines dug off the side of the road offer little protection from the spread of disease. Dysentery moves among the Crusaders like an invisible predator, sparing almost no one. The symptoms hit quickly: stomach cramps, sweating, vomiting. And if that wasn't bad enough, the dehydration comes next. Once someone gets sick, they're done. They collapse right there or shuffle off to the side, unable to continue, left behind while the rest of the group trudges onward. No one stops to take care of them. They can't. You can still hear some of their faint cries in the distance as the group moves further away. The healers, or what pass for them, don't inspire much hope. Their tools are basic, made mostly of cloth bandages and sheer guesswork. You spot one applying leeches to a sick man lying beside the main road. It'll cure the bad humors, the healer says, without much confidence. You look away quickly, realizing that if illness claims you, this is the best you can expect. Leeches and conviction, two things that don't exactly scream life-saving. The thought of it gnaws at you, making your stomach twist as you keep walking. Nights are no better. When you finally stop for the day, setting up camp with the others is another reminder of how grossly unprepared everyone is. The camps look like hurried congregations of bodies huddled together in clusters around small fires. There are no tents to speak of, no plan for sleeping arrangements. The ground is damp and uneven, and you wake up more tired than when you lay down, your back aching from the cold dirt pressed against it. Food grows scarcer by the day. Clean water. You gave up on that almost immediately. The days start to blend together. It rains, turning the road into a slick mudslide that pulls at your feet, making even the simplest movement feel impossible. The rain isn't gentle or cleansing. It's biblical, angry, vengeful, screaming from the sky like it has a grievance against the earth itself. When it's not raining, the sun beats down relentlessly, sweat trickling into your eyes, mixing with dirt and salt until every blink stings. Slowly, the morale of the group erodes. Conversations grow shorter, quieter, until you're all marching in near silence, aside from the occasional cough or sniffle. You catch people crying quietly, hiding their faces as if embarrassed to show weakness. A few start to fall behind. You wonder if they're giving up, but when you turn to look, they're gone entirely. Maybe they turned back. Maybe they were left behind due to sickness or hunger. You try not to think about it too much. It's easier that way. Survival is becoming your only focus. The preacher still walks at the front, shouting faint words of encouragement from time to time, but they've started to sound like noise to you. It's hard to believe in glory and salvation when everything hurts and nothing improves. That faint glimmer of hope you brought with you is dimming, its light flickering under the weight of harsh reality. You wonder if Jerusalem is even real, or if it's just some distant mirage meant to lure you into weeks of torment and suffering. By now, the promises of glory don't matter. Survival itself has become the goal. Your feet are raw from sores, your lips cracked from thirst, and your stomach feels like a hollow drum begging for even the tiniest morsel of food. Each night, as you collapse onto the cold, unforgiving ground for sleep, you can't help but wonder if you'll make it through the next day. But every morning, you shuffle back into line, forward into yet another stretch of unknown misery. You're not sure why anymore. Maybe it's stubbornness, maybe it's faith, or maybe, like everyone else, you're just too scared to stop. But there's no denying it. Things are falling apart. And the worst part is, you've yet to meet the locals who aren't too thrilled about hosting an uninvited army like yours. You've been marching for weeks by now, through lands that all start to blur together. Rolling hills, dense forests, and stretches of open plains dotted with villages that are a little too quiet. At first, the scenery was a welcome change, something to distract you from the misery of the march. But now, the quiet is unsettling. It feels like the wind is holding its breath. Everything seems too still, like the darkness just before a storm. The preacher at the front of the group, his staff always waving toward the horizon, hasn't said much today. Even he looks wary, scanning the road ahead, like he knows something's waiting just over the next hill. And something is. The first sign of trouble comes at dusk, when most of the group is focused on the usual evening chaos of scrambling to make camp. A scream cuts through the restless murmur of voices. It's sharp and raw, the kind of sound that freezes the air around it. You stand up too quickly, your legs already sore and unsteady, craning your neck to see what's happening. Shouts follow, different voices overlapping, panicked. The preacher's voice rises above them, yelling something, but it's impossible to hear him clearly over the growing noise. Then you see them in the fading light, rushing down from the hillside. Figures moving fast, carrying weapons. Not crusaders, locals. Panic spreads like fire. At first, some of the group assumes it's just a misunderstanding. A few people wave and call out in broken Latin, trying to signal friendliness. That only makes it worse. The locals, a mix of men, a few women, and even some teenagers, don't slow down. They close in, shouting in a language you don't understand, and hurling stones before you even see their faces clearly. Someone nearby pushes you, and then the crowd collapses into chaos. People screaming, stumbling, tripping over each other in their rush to grab whatever they can use to defend themselves. You clutch your makeshift weapon, a blunt farming scythe, and suddenly realize you're trembling. You've never actually used this thing in a fight. You barely know how to hold it. The first clash is nothing like the stories you've heard about brave battles and grand armies. It's brutal, messy, and fast. The locals are coordinated, moving with a purpose that your group of bedraggled and disorganized crusaders can't hope to match. They strike hard and then disappear, melting back into the dark like they were never there. You hear the dull thud of rocks finding their targets, followed by cries of pain. Someone near you collapses, clutching their side and coughing wetly. The faint smell of blood, metallic and sickening, hits you, mixing with the sweat and dirt already clinging to your skin. Your pulse is pounding so loudly in your ears that it drowns out most of the noise around you. When it's over, and it's over quickly, the damage is clear. A portion of your group's supplies has been taken, torn from trembling hands and scattered across the grass. A handful of your fellow marchers are lying on the ground, motionless. Others are limping, blood dripping down their faces or staining their tunics. The preacher tries to rally the survivors, but his voice sounds shakier now, less certain. "Stay together," he shouts, gripping his staff tightly. "This is just a test of faith." A test of faith. You look at the body closest to you, his face twisted in pain, his eyes staring blankly at the sky, and wonder how much more faith you're expected to have. These skirmishes become a haunting rhythm. Nighttime raids, daytime ambushes. Sometimes they come at you head on, and other times they lie in wait, picking you off one by one in narrow passes or wooded trails. The locals know the land far better than you do. They use it to their advantage, leading groups into traps and then vanishing as quickly as they appeared. At first, you try to fight back, but it doesn't take long to realize that your group is hopelessly outmatched. Most of you can't even properly grip your weapons, let alone defend against trained or experienced fighters. You're marching with what could generously be called a heavily armed mob, and it shows. Every ambush leaves your group smaller, weaker, and more desperate. The fear never leaves you. Even when no one's attacking, the tension lingers, tightening your chest with every step. You start jumping at shadows, flinching at the sound of snapping branches or distant laughter. The locals' attacks aren't random. They're deliberate. They strike when your guard is down, when people are sleeping, arguing, or weakest from hunger. The entire journey starts to feel like walking a tightrope over an endless abyss, knowing the next ambush is always just a step away. But the worst part isn't the physical toll. It's the way suspicion and distrust begin eating away at the group from within. After one particularly brutal raid, when 2 supply carts are lost entirely, fingers start pointing. "They knew where we'd be," someone shouts. Someone told them. The idea of a traitor takes root quickly, spreading like poison through what little unity remains. People start openly accusing each other of hoarding food, of plotting with the locals, of being spies for some imagined enemy. Fights break out, small scuffles that leave everyone even more resentful and divided. You find yourself avoiding eye contact with everyone, convinced that even a sideways glance could spark another explosion. And then there's the helplessness. After one failed skirmish, when the locals burn your remaining wagon wheels and retreat with most of your grain stores, you sit down among the ashes and wonder if you'll ever feel secure again. The preacher talks about Jerusalem as if it's still just over the next hill, but you're starting to wonder if it exists at all, or if it's just a distant promise he's holding on to keep everyone moving. You don't want to admit it, but hope feels far away now, buried under fear. The locals, meanwhile, don't stop. They cut off access to nearby water sources. They steal what little food you have left. In one village, they even barricade the gates, refusing you entry. You came seeking salvation, the preacher says, but they see you as a broke, heavily armed tourist with boundary issues. And honestly, they're not wrong. The cultural barriers don't help. More than once, an argument breaks out between your group and the locals because of a miscommunication. Most of them don't speak your language, and you definitely don't speak theirs. Asking for water becomes an ordeal. More than once, a simple gesture gets interpreted as a demand or worse, a threat. The locals don't trust you, and why would they? Every crusader looks like trouble. A dusty, desperate stranger who might just trample their crops, steal their livestock, or burn their homes if given half a chance. One night, after yet another skirmish, you sit by a dying fire and realize how much the group has shrunk. More than half of the faces you saw at the rally point are gone now. Some fell to disease, others to starvation. A few turned back, deciding the danger wasn't worth it. But most were taken by the constant raids, killed, captured, or simply lost in the chaos that followed every attack. The preacher tries again to rally whoever's left, speaking about glory and salvation in a voice that cracks under the weight of exhaustion. God is testing us, he says. Quiet murmurs of prayer ripple weakly through the camp, but no one looks convinced. You press on the next morning because, at this point, there's nothing else you can do. Turning back feels impossible. There's no safety in retreat, not without supplies or a plan. Besides, what's waiting for you if you go home? A life of shame, hunger, and endless wet fields. No, you'll push forward, one agonizing step at a time, even if the locals tear you apart in the process. It feels like madness, but the belief in a better end, for either your soul or your suffering, is the only thing keeping your feet moving. Every step forward is heavy with dread, and yet you keep taking it. But as the group trudges on, it becomes clear that there's something even worse waiting for you ahead. The next town isn't a scattering of huts or a quiet village with locked gates. It's a city with high walls, and behind those walls lie new horrors you can't even begin to imagine. This isn't an ambush. It's something much larger, much grimmer. Welcome to the brutal and unrelenting world of siege warfare, The city sits on the horizon, perched on a hill with walls that seem to stretch endlessly. This is your first siege, and somehow it already feels wrong. From a distance, the city looks almost peaceful. Smoke rises here and there, probably from cooking fires or home hearths, but all you can think of is how those soft plumes will turn into thick black clouds of destruction when the siege begins. Around you, the mass of Crusaders stirs uneasily. Some people fiddle with their weapons or nervously adjust makeshift helmets, while others sit slumped on cracked barrels, conserving what little energy they have left. The preacher paces somewhere ahead, his staff raised high as he mutters about glory and divine purpose. But no one seems to hear him. The mood has changed since the early days of the march. Fewer people cheer his sermons now. Most just stand silently or stare at their dirty hands, caught in a stupor of exhaustion. The reality of siege warfare begins with waiting. Long, soul-crushing waiting. You'd thought an army like yours would simply storm the gates, batter them down, and claim victory in a single glorious day. But that's not how sieges work. According to the preacher, or maybe that knight in rusted armor who loves to pontificate while coughing into his sleeve, the plan is simple. Starve the people inside until they give up, which sounds great in theory, except you're starving too. Supplies have been scarce since long before you reached the city, and whatever scraps you brought with you taste worse with every sad attempt to stretch them across another day. You don't know if it's stale bread or grit you're chewing half the time, but you eat it anyway. The camp outside the city walls quickly becomes a haunting display of human misery. Fires are scattered here and there, cooking whatever odd combinations of foraged herbs or questionable meat people can scavenge. If someone spoke to you about chivalry or honor now, you'd laugh, if you had the energy for it. The strongest Crusaders marched off earlier to search for food in nearby villages. They're supposed to bring back supplies, but you can already tell by the nervous looks around camp that no one expects much. Every passing day feels like a cruel loop. Ration your scraps, endure the horrible stench of unwashed bodies and open latrines, and hope you won't die before anyone inside the city even notices your existence. Disease, of course, thrives in the perfect storm of overcrowding, hunger, and utter filth. You remember hearing the jokes about soup germs, back when the idea of sickness seemed distant. Now, those jokes aren't funny. Dysentery's everywhere, spreading like a silent assassin through the mussed rows of Crusaders' tents, or what passes for tents, since scraps of cloth strung up with sticks hardly count as proper shelter. The sick aren't hard to spot. The ghostly pale, the doubled over in agony, the ones kneeling in the mud long after their strength has left them. You try not to look too closely. There's nothing to offer them, no medicine or magic cure. A few lie in the open fields, unmoving. No one has time to bury the bodies, so they're left there, a morbid warning to the rest of you. Meanwhile, life inside the city carries on, or tries to. From your vantage point just beyond the walls, you sometimes hear faint noises drifting over. Laughter, arguments, the occasional clatter of hooves on stone streets. The defenders on the walls shout insults, though you only vaguely understand the language. A few of them hurl rocks or shoot arrows, but those gestures mostly seem half-hearted, more about reminding you they're still up there. The bitterness creeping through your own camp isn't hard to imagine spilling into their lives too. You've heard whispers that people inside are rationing their food, sacrificing livestock, maybe even turning on each other already. But still, they're safer on their side of the wall than you are out here. They're surviving, for now. What really gnaws at you, though, is the smell. A siege has a way of turning both sides, attackers and defenders, into prisoners of their own filth. Everything reeks. Sweat, unwashed cloth, the acrid stench from makeshift latrines, and the gut-turning tang of rot as supplies spoil faster than anyone can eat them. The smells blend together into a choking, suffocating weight that hangs over the camp like an invisible plague cloud. And that's before you factor in the battlefield itself. Whenever there's a brief skirmish at the walls, arrows exchanged, ladders raised but quickly repelled, the bodies left behind add a new, horrifying layer to the odor. Death smells dense and oily, something you didn't know until now. You breathe it in even while you tell yourself not to, cursing every time your empty stomach churns at the thought. That brings you to the moral dilemma that no one ever really prepared you for. When the preacher back in your village talked about glory and salvation, it all seemed so simple. Good versus evil. God's will against uncivilized heretics. But now you're standing outside a city occupied by civilians, people who look like you, sound like you, and probably just want food and safety as much as you do. What are you even fighting for? Salvation, riches. The preacher keeps croaking about a holy mission, but more and more, it feels like you're just starving out innocence. Any notion of divine purpose fades further every time you hear cries from across the walls, children wailing, desperate voices calling back taunts as if they'd make you leave. You don't say any of this out loud, of course. It would make you look weak, disloyal. But the thoughts stay with you, gnawing at the edges of your belief. If there's any part of siege warfare that isn't mind-numbing misery, it's the occasional flashes of violence when commanders finally try to breach the walls. These moments are brief and chaotic, and they often feel less like battles and more like frenzied accidents. When the order comes to attack, the mob surges forward with ladders, battering rams, or whatever else can be cobbled together. Ladders break under the weight of climbing men. The people at the bottom, likely peasants like you, struggle just to hold their ground, while defenders shower them with rocks. Boiling oil spills down the walls in thick, sputtering streams, turning skin into something you can't bear to describe. Screams fill the air, sharp and wet, then stop abruptly as bodies hit the ground. It's over before anyone even reaches the top. You stumble back to camp, trembling, wondering how much more of this you can endure. The longer the siege drags on, the more it feels like a mindless exercise in failure. No glory, no salvation, just more dead crusaders littering the field while the city holds steady. The preacher insists that victory is close. God is guiding us, he says, though his hoarse voice grows weaker with each day of hunger. To you, it doesn't feel like guidance. It feels like slow torment, like some cosmic test without any clear end. At night, as you lie awake on the cold dirt, you realize you've started to forget why you even came here in the first place. You don't think about divine rewards anymore. You think about surviving, about food, about water clean enough that it won't make you even sicker. You wonder if Jerusalem, the real Jerusalem, is a place at all, or just an idea someone invented to keep you moving. But eventually, the siege ends. After weeks, or was it months, the city finally falls. The walls are breached and the gates swing open, but the feeling isn't what you expected. There's no rush of triumph, no angelic chorus marking your victory. Instead, there's chaos, screaming, and fire. You stumble through the streets alongside the others, stepping over rubble, bodies, and the few defenders still clinging desperately to life. Some crusaders loot what little they can find. Tarnished jewelry, broken furniture, dried meat that may as well be gold. Others drag screaming civilians into the streets, You don't look too closely. It's better not to see. When it's over, you sit down on a broken crate, staring at the charred ruins of a city your group destroyed. Around you, people argue over spoils, their voices hollow and dull. The smell of smoke hangs thick in the air, clinging to your hair, your clothes, your skin. You try to feel something, pride, accomplishment, even relief, but all you feel is tired, just exhausted beyond words. Whatever you thought victory would be, this isn't it. You've won, technically speaking, but nothing about this feels like winning. Your group begins to gather what's left of its strength, preparing for the next leg of the journey. If the siege taught you anything, it's that survival is the only victory that matters now. Behind you, the ruins smolder, full of crying civilians and broken doors. Ahead, there's still so much farther to go. And if the cracks forming in your group are any indication, the greatest threat to your survival isn't behind some city wall anymore. It's standing beside you. The further you march, the further salvation feels from reach. And let's be honest, the further Jerusalem feels too. What began as a grand, almost mythical journey now feels more like a punishment stretched over far too many days. You'd hoped your faith would carry you through, but instead, it's dragging itself along behind you, barely clinging to life. That fire in your chest that once burned so brightly, it's little more than embers now. The promises of glory and salvation that had you dropping your old life like dead weight now seem laughable in the face of what you've endured. And around you, it's clear you're not the only one reaching this conclusion. The others in your group, those that are left, shuffle forward in silence most days now. Any remnants of camaraderie have dissolved, replaced by an atmosphere that feels heavier than the supplies on your back. You rarely even make eye contact anymore. Everyone's too busy staring at the dirt road under their feet, focused on taking one step without collapsing or wondering why the preacher's fiery sermons, so convincing back in the village, now sound emptier with each passing mile. Your losing a war to soup germs had started as a grim joke about dysentery that someone told weeks ago, but no one's laughing anymore. It's just the simple truth now, impossible to avoid or romanticize. Somewhere back there on the road, you buried a friend, or the body of someone who might have been a friend had things been different. You try not to think about it too much because thinking leads to doubt, and doubt isn't a luxury you can afford. Still, the memory surfaces when you least expect it. The glassy look in his eyes, the slackness of his jaw that contrasted so harshly with the way he used to cheer back when this felt like an adventure. He was one of the first to fall sick, and you told yourself it was just bad luck. But that was before the sickness spread, before the smell of death became so normal that it barely registers anymore. You don't have answers for why this is happening. Not really. Medieval medicine is less science and more interpretive dance with herbs. After all, no matter how much the makeshift healers insist they know what they're doing. One of them, you don't even know his name, keeps talking about bad humors while shoving leeches at anyone willing to stay still long enough. Deep down though, you know the problem isn't bad humors or a lack of leeches. It's this entire journey. The hardships don't feel like tests of faith anymore. They feel like punishment, executed quietly and methodically across every mile. You've started wondering if this is divine punishment, and not for the people you're supposedly liberating, but for you. What if the suffering is meant to teach you something? Or worse, what if it's proof that God's not actually on your side after all? That thought creeps into your mind late at night when it's too quiet, and the sounds of coughing have momentarily subsided, and you hate yourself for thinking it. You grip your tunic like clutching fabric will somehow keep your faith from slipping away entirely. The promise of salvation still dances just out of reach, but some nights you wonder if it's all been a lie. Things only get worse after you overhear two men. You think they're knights, though it's hard to tell under the layers of dirt and exhaustion, arguing about Jerusalem. Not about how to get there, no. About whether it's actually worth it. The way they speak, it's clear they've marched much farther than you, been in more battles, lost more comrades, and seen more horrors. The preacher doesn't know what lies ahead, one says, spitting into the dirt, as if the words leave a bitter taste in his mouth. Salvation. We'd be lucky if we see sunrise some days. You've never heard anyone speak like this before, not openly. Back home, questioning the church, or anyone with a cross around their neck, was as unthinkable as suggesting the moon might fall out of the sky. But here, in the endless stretch of wilderness, the rules feel different. People argue more freely, whisper doubts into each other's ears when they think no one's listening. Some of those whispers stick with you. You try to shake them off, to remind yourself why you started at all. But when the road stretches on so endlessly, faith feels like a distant, unreachable thing. And then there's the preacher himself. Once, his sermons lifted you, made you feel chosen, elevated. But these days, his words don't feel as powerful. Sometimes they don't feel like anything at all, just noise bouncing off your ears while your feet drag forward. He's as dirty and gaunt as the rest of you now, though he still clutches that staff like it's his lifeline. His voice is hoarser, his rhetoric a little shakier. Maybe he's tired, or maybe he's starting to realize that his promises have come unraveled. Still, he presses on. Jerusalem is closer with every step, he shouts, his enthusiasm feeling forced. Glory awaits those who persevere. You hope he's right. You have to hope, because if he's not, then you're just marching toward an idea. A word he said once that became your entire existence. It doesn't help that every new day heaps more brutality on top of your doubts. A few days ago, you saw a town, what was left of it. It had been sacked by another group of crusaders ahead of you, and the sight that greeted you was hard to stomach. Charred buildings, untouched bodies, and a small group of survivors huddling together near what used to be their wells. Salvation, one of your comrades muttered bitterly, though the word dripped with irony. You didn't linger there long, but the image sits in the back of your mind, poking at your thoughts during long stretches of empty marching. The same goes for the sieges, the so-called victories. When you stormed the walls of that last city, you were so focused on surviving that you didn't let yourself really think about what was happening. Now, though, the memories creep in. The civilians screaming, children clinging to their parents as chaos swirled around them. You remember stepping over someone, alive or dead, you weren't sure, to grab at a loaf of bread someone else had dropped. That bread saved you in the moment, but it tastes different in hindsight. You tell yourself it was worth it, that survival demands sacrifice. But sometimes, late at night, you wonder who exactly you've been sacrificing all this time. No one says it out loud, but you all feel it. Jerusalem isn't a place anymore. It's an idea, one that doesn't feel any closer no matter how far you walk. Every step toward that idea strips another piece of yourself away. The faith that brought you here, the friendships that made it bearable, even the identity you clung to so tightly at the start. You're not the person who left home. You no longer know what you are. In rare moments of quiet, you think back to the promises that brought you here. you start picking them apart, trying to figure out where the truth ends and the lies begin. "You're not clean. You're not even close," the preacher had said once, talking about sins and salvation. Funny how those words feel more literal these days. You haven't been clean for weeks. Not in body, not in spirit, not in anything that matters. By now, the road ahead feels darker than what lies behind you, and you wonder if that's the cruelest irony of all. Every village you pass through, every battle you survive, makes Jerusalem seem less tangible and more like something someone dreamt up to keep you moving. It's becoming harder to look ahead at all, but you keep walking, because stopping feels like an admission you can't make. Not to yourself, and definitely not to the preacher or the others trudging beside you. You just wonder, more and more, how far you'll get before the faint flickers of faith burn out completely. Or worse, how far you'll get if they never truly return. Congratulations, you've reached Jerusalem, or at least a city that looks like it might be important enough to storm. After months of suffering, starvation, and trudging through what feels like every imaginable kind of human misery, there it is. Walls. Your legs ache, your feet barely work, and half the group has vanished along the way. But you've made it. You'd think you'd feel triumphant, maybe exhilarated, but that initial jolt of excitement fizzles the longer you stare at those walls. They're higher than you expected, stronger too, and behind them, somewhere in there lies salvation, or maybe something close to it, but getting to it feels like climbing a mountain with no summit in sight. The preacher's voice rises above the crowd as always, his words strung together in half-sung prayers and promises of redemption. "This is it," he shouts, pointing at the gates like they're glowing with holiness. "God's will brought us here. Prepare yourselves for the glory of victory." But you've heard it all before, and by this point, not many people are listening. The crowd of battered crusaders around you looks more like a group of sunburned skeletons than the army of righteous warriors you thought you were joining. Their weapons are dulled by use, or more often, disuse, and most of them are swaying where they stand, their bodies too weak to do much else. Glory doesn't seem all that achievable right now. Then comes the dreaded word, siege. The entire concept of it makes your stomach sink, heavier than the stale bit of bread tucked into your pouch. Another siege? Another long stretch of sitting, waiting, and starving just so you can maybe crawl your way into the city in the end. You've been through this before, and you already know what's coming. The endless days of boredom, the cold nights on dirty ground, the constant threat of illness creeping through the camp like an invisible predator. There's no suspense here, just the grim realization that every bag of supplies you've carried has to last twice as long as planned. It starts with mingled quiet and chaos. The slow advance begins, and ladders are raised against the walls. From where you stand, it's easy to see the gaps in the plan, or the lack of one entirely. This isn't so much an attack as it is a frenzy, a mix of desperation and blind faith sending people forward in droves. The defenders atop the walls are ready. Of course they are. You watch as stones hurtle downward, taking some of the crusaders mid-climb. Arrows rain down next, hitting their targets whether by precision or sheer luck. You flinch every time you hear the thump of a body hitting the ground below, and it gets harder to step forward as the chaos unfolds. The preacher still stands at the back of the group, his voice louder than before. Do not falter. Remember why you are here. He hasn't moved much from his place just behind the chaos. It feels less like leadership and more like staying out of harm's way while still pretending to lead. His shouts are barely audible over the panicked cries of men scrambling to hold their shields high or drag injured comrades away. You wonder if he knows how hollow his words sound. As the siege grinds on, everything descends into a kind of sickening, repetitive rhythm. Push forward, get repelled, lose people, retreat to regroup, and then do it all again. The defenders inside the city know exactly what they're doing. They're patient, watching for any weakness, hitting hard when you seem weakest. They hurl fire, oil, even insults. You think you might have understood some of their words at one point, but now everything is drowned in the static of battle noise. Metal clanging, people shouting, and your own heartbeat drumming in your ears. It's easy to lose track of time. Maybe weeks pass, but it's hard to know for sure. The days blend together because everyone feels the same. Another exhausting march toward those walls. Another attempt to breach them. Another day spent retreating and waiting in misery. Food is running low. It's like the storyteller on the march used to say, half joking, "You're losing a war to soup germs." You choke down whatever scraps of food remain, though each bite tastes worse than the last, mostly because you know there isn't much more left to eat. When the final phase of the attack comes, it's not with a sense of triumph, but exhaustion. Somehow, the walls are breached. Maybe it's luck. Maybe it's exhaustion on the other side too. You don't know, or care really. All you know is that somehow, the gates are open, and the mob surges forward like a dam breaking. It's not a march now, it's a stampede. A chaotic flood of bodies pouring into the city with the frantic, desperate energy of people who have waited too long to act. Inside the walls, it's chaos layered on chaos. If you thought things were bad outside, it's worse here. Smoke and screaming, as someone in your group mutters, almost to himself. The streets are packed with soldiers, locals, looters, and then, you can't quite believe it, fire. Flames crawl up the sides of buildings, reaching out to consume homes and lives indiscriminately. By this point, the battle barely feels like a battle. It's an explosion of anger, fear, hunger, and maybe even guilt. People scream as they're dragged out of homes, others weep over the dead. And everywhere you turn, there's blood. It drips from wounds, stains walls, and pools in the cracks of the cobblestone streets. And there you are, standing in the middle of it all. You feel dazed, like you're not fully present in the moment. It's hard to figure out what's worse. The civilians crying, the bodies strewn everywhere, or the mix of triumphant shouting and maniacal laughter from some of your fellow crusaders. This is apparently what victory looks like. Less a noble procession, and more a stampede of sweaty, half-mad lunatics with weapons and a vendetta against architecture. The preacher finds you, or maybe he finds the crowd in general. Just as the last bit of resistance dies away, he stands on top of some rubble, raising his arms in the same well-practiced gesture he's used since the beginning. "We have triumphed," he hollers, his voice cracking from the strain. "God is with us." But as you glance around, it sure doesn't feel that way. You're standing in a city full of crying civilians and broken doors, trying to remember whether this was about salvation or plunder. You're bleeding too, a shallow cut on your ankle that you can't even remember getting. Everyone looks thinner, dirtier, and somehow both older and younger all at once. Around you, people are picking their way through the wreckage, searching not for salvation but any scraps of food or treasure they can carry out of this place. And then comes the emptiness. You're sitting on a broken crate in the ruins of Jerusalem, a city meant to be holy, meant to fulfill all the promises you clung to for so long. What has it given you? A hollow victory, the kind that tastes bitter even when you try convincing yourself otherwise. Months of suffering brought you here. and all you found is devastation. The city's, yours, everyone's. You're thinner, weaker, and more exhausted than you've ever been. The person you were when this journey began feels like a stranger now. Maybe you thought you'd feel closer to God here, but everything about this place feels wrong. The streets smell like blood and ash. The few locals you see shrink away, their faces twisted with fear and grief. Is this what you marched for? Was this the plan all along? Or was it just chaos disguised as divine destiny, like a traveling disaster with a cross slapped onto it? Around you, crusaders stagger through the debris, faces pale and sunken, holding sacks of looted goods like trophies that mean nothing. Some argue over who gets what. Others sit quietly, heads in their hands, as if just realizing what they've done or failed to do. You glance down at your own hands. They're dirty. They've been dirty since the beginning. And they'll stay dirty, no matter how many victories your preacher screams about. The journey is over, at least for now. But looking around, it's hard not to think the real battle was never for Jerusalem. It was for survival. And congratulations, you've technically won. You're alive, though at this point, you wonder why that doesn't feel like much of a prize. Looking back at the Crusades, it's hard to ignore the strange gap between what they were supposed to be and what they actually became. They started as a call to glory, salvation, and purpose, the kind of pitch that doesn't just inspire, it downright convinces. Who wouldn't want that? A holy mission that promised heaven and maybe a little earthly reward too. But then you picture the mud-choked roads, the starvation, the injuries, the endless confusion about what direction you're even going. Suddenly, it doesn't feel so divine. The shiny idea of reclaiming Jerusalem, of seeing your name written into the book of life, gets buried under a pile of human disaster. And let's be clear, the disconnect wasn't a fluke. It was baked into the whole operation. The Crusades were built on a foundation of grand spiritual ideals, but there was very little practical planning underneath. That might sound familiar even today. Plans that look great on paper until they slam headfirst into reality. Poor leadership and terrible logistics were everywhere. Nobody thought about how to organize thousands of peasants who'd never been more than 5 miles from home, let alone how to feed them. And this chaos wasn't some unavoidable medieval quirk. It was preventable. The whole thing depended on blind faith, a trust that somehow everything would just magically work out. Spoiler, it didn't. Now, before you assume this is just some historical hiccup we've completely grown out of, think again. That same mix of over-promised ideals and clumsy execution shows up even now. Maybe not in the form of pitchfork-wielding peasants, but in other ways. Look at rushed international interventions or badly structured social movements. Just like those Crusaders, modern endeavors often struggle under the weight of their own ambition, falling apart when faced with real-world complexities. It's a recurring pattern. People rally behind charismatic leaders or compelling visions without stopping to think about the logistics. Sound familiar? If history has taught us anything, it's that lofty goals can crumble in the face of poorly thought-out details. The Crusaders stumbled into hostile territory, sure, but the hostility wasn't always a mystery. Imagine showing up unannounced in someone's backyard with an army of starving strangers and acting like it's your divine right to claim their town. Unsurprisingly, the locals were not enthusiastic about their uninvited guests. To the Crusaders, they were infidels, portrayed as enemies of God. But to the people behind the city walls, the Crusaders were invaders, desperate mobs who burned fields, raided supplies, and left ruined villages in their wake. That tension wasn't about religion alone. It was about survival. It was about resources. It was a clash of two sides struggling to protect themselves. And let's not forget about the internal chaos. The Crusader army wasn't some disciplined, unified force. It was more like a boiling pot of clashing personalities, factions, and frankly, unchecked egos. Nobles squabbled with peasants, leaders bickered over strategy, and everyone seemed ready to turn on each other the moment food ran out. This wasn't just logistical failure. It was human nature running wild under pressure. When you're hungry, sick, and exhausted, it's easy to see everyone around you as either competition or a threat. How many times do we see that today? Divisions springing up in groups that were, at least on paper, fighting for the same cause. Nothing erodes unity faster than desperation, and the Crusades were proof of that on a grand scale. Even the religious aspect wasn't as clean-cut as it seemed in the sermons. The Crusades were marketed as this noble, God-driven quest, but the motivations of the participants were, let's say, varied. Sure, some people believed in the spiritual rewards, but others saw the Crusades as a ticket to a better life, or an excuse to escape the worst one they had back home. The merging of faith and personal ambition didn't make for the purest intentions. And when personal ambition collides with survival, things get ugly. Looting and violence weren't just unfortunate side effects of the Crusades. They became the main events. Faith became a convenient cover for destruction, and the idea of glorifying God blurred with the more immediate goal of filling an empty stomach. Historians today wrestle with the messiness of the Crusades, and it's no wonder why. On one hand, you have this grand narrative about knights and redemption, but on the ground, it's a gritty, chaotic tale of human suffering. The people who marched weren't just participants in history, they were victims of it too. They believed in a vision that crumbled under the weight of disease, war, and exhaustion. A lot of historians see the Crusades as a cautionary tale, a warning about how unchecked ambition, especially when paired with blind faith, can lead to disaster. They challenge us to think harder, to not just rally behind an idea, but actually question its foundations. And isn't that the real lesson here? The past isn't just something dusty we read about because we have to. It's a mirror. The Crusaders might have swapped swords for scythes, but the human behaviors driving that chaos haven't really disappeared. Whether it's large-scale wars or small-scale political movements, the same mistakes keep showing up. Poor planning, blind trust in authority, and a tendency to put lofty ideals above practical concerns. The Crusades remind us to stop, think, and ask questions when leaders make big promises. Are the plans realistic? Who's benefiting? Who's paying the price? But the Crusades also give us something else. Perspective. Looking at what these people endured makes modern life feel, well, manageable by comparison. The comforts we take for granted, clean water, access to food, antibiotics, would have seemed like unimaginable luxuries to someone trudging through the Levant with blistered feet and a fever. When we complain about slow Wi-Fi, it's sobering to remember that these people didn't even know boiling water could save lives. Perspective has a way of making your day-to-day frustrations seem a little smaller. Still, it's not about feeling smugly superior to the past. It's about appreciating how far we've come while recognizing how many of the same issues still linger. It's about empathy, seeing those Crusaders as more than just faceless historical figures, but as people. People much like us, caught between high ideals and ugly realities, driven by hope but undone by the chaos of being human. Reflecting on their lives reminds us that history isn't some distant, irrelevant thing. It's us, our choices, our behaviors, our capacity for both faith and failure. And maybe it's not just about learning from their mistakes, but also about understanding their fears, their motivations, and their resilience. Yes, they were often misguided. Yes, they caused unimaginable suffering along the way. But they aren't so different from us in their hopes, however misplaced. They wanted to believe in something bigger than themselves. They wanted to matter in a world that seemed vast and unforgiving, and that, at its core, is timeless. So tonight, as you think back on their chaos, maybe let a little gratitude settle into you. Gratitude that you live in an age where your greatest battles might be over mundane things like bad phone signals rather than bad pottage. Gratitude for modern medicine, for laws that, mostly, discourage your neighbors from raiding your pantry with a pitchfork, and for the stunning lack of sieges in your immediate future. Remembering the Crusaders isn't about pity, though you can't help but feel it sometimes. It's about realizing the value of what you have, even if life today still has plenty of its own struggles. And with that, let their story bring you some perspective as you close your eyes tonight. They marched hundreds of miles in search of something better, and while they may not have found it, we can learn from their journey. Whether it's about faith, ambition, or just the sheer human spirit that kept them alive against all odds, they're a reminder that resilience can be both inspiring and a little terrifying. So sleep well with that in mind, because you're infinitely better off than anyone in the age of the Crusades ever was. The Crusades weren't divine destiny. They were chaos wrapped in faith, powered by stale bread and desperation. For most participants, lofty ideals of salvation and glory dissolved into a grim struggle to survive disease, hunger, and confusion. Every step forward exposed a profound gap between spiritual promises and harsh reality. Their victories weren't about glory. They were about enduring absurd, punishing conditions. Yet, their legacy isn't all futility. It shows us resilience, the drive to find purpose even in disasters. So next time you sip clean water or sleep without fear of siege, remember history's lessons and what it cost.